All right. Well, good afternoon to everybody. We're glad to see you on this little bit rainy afternoon, but we all know we need some rain here in Oklahoma. So we're just going to look at that as a good thing. We are happy to have you here with us today in February. I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, Brenda, who is our Director of Social Studies, and Sharon Morgan, who is our Director for Elementary ELA. I think everybody knows who I am at this point, but just in case you don't, my name is Melissa Algram. I'm the Director of Reading Sufficiency here at the State Department. And that is the purpose of what we are in here talking about today. So you'll find in our chat, I'm sure Sharon or Brenda can drop in there for us our link to our running agenda, which you should be seeing on your screen as well. So we've got a couple of links that are in here too, but we will drop those links in the chat later on when it is appropriate for that time. We have up here at the top of our running agenda, as we always do, our names and links to our email addresses, as well as some other helpful names for you. Kristen Perez-Rickles and Alexa Hudick are our colleagues in special education. That can be really helpful if we're having questions about how we need to do any crossover work between general education and special education, or sometimes how screening for reading difficulties, including characteristics of dyslexia, might relate to that programming. So those are really good resources to call. We do work pretty closely with them. Dylan Savage is also our reporting specialist. Quite a bit with emails. Let me hang on a second and make sure we all muted. There we go. Okay, so for today, we know right now it's kind of a little bit of our slow time in RSA, it feels like, as we are trying to wrap up some things and shift over into our end of year. Probably doesn't feel slow for you at all, but it is, there's not something actively going on and working right now as far as a report that has to be turned in. But we did want to let you know that we are working on the guidance document for screening for reading difficulties, including characteristics of dyslexia. And we have been working to gather a lot of the questions that we have received over the last year as we're working on that, to make sure that if we need to make any adjustments to guidance, we can do that, as well as preparing any FAQ documents. So I wanted to let you know the questions that we are currently working on. We've kind of grouped them together so that you can kind of see what's coming. And then we also want to give you an opportunity to be able to add on to that if you have some questions that have been coming up that you do not feel are adequately answered in guidance, or that are on this list that we're currently working on, so that we can make sure that we include those. So just so you know, the questions that we are currently working on is there's several questions around screening frequency. We've received questions like, do we have to screen all of our K-3 students every year? If they're found to be at risk or not at risk, do we have to screen them again this next year? Should students be assessed for risks of characteristics of dyslexia at the middle of the year if they weren't here at the beginning? That's a great question. And then, should students be assessed for risk of characteristics of dyslexia if they're below the grade level target at that middle of year, but they were okay at the beginning of year? So just some really fine detailed questions as we're kind of getting down to, and we're working with our colleagues in special education, doing that, really digging into what the legislation requires so that we can let you know what is it that's required, what is it that's recommended for best practice, and then that way you can make your decisions as a district moving from there. As far as timing, we have had a lot of questions asking if that timeline for testing and communication with families will be reconsidered. Yes, we are looking at that to see how we might need to adjust that. So we will make sure that we get that guidance ready. Anything beyond third grade, what is the school's responsibility if a family is requesting screening for fourth grade or higher, so that we can make sure that we are pretty clear on that. This year, we really did just focus on trying to get things off the ground in K-3, but we know that that's an issue that we're dealing with as well. So we want to make sure that we have clear guidance for our schools. And then we have a lot of questions around special education. So like, what is the difference between eligibility for special education services for dyslexia and a dyslexia diagnosis? Because those are two very different things. What's the guidance for our parents that want a diagnosis of dyslexia, even if their student's already on an IEP? We've had many districts calling about that. But what if they want a diagnosis of dyslexia, but they're not yet on an IEP? And then is the district's obligation different for students receiving special education versus those not identified for special education? What do we do with outside evaluations? And then for response to intervention approaches to special education, how should screening be incorporated or aligned with that process? So those are all things that we're working on. What we would appreciate from this group, and we're going to take a couple of minutes to give you time to do that, is on this document, which I think Brenda or Sharon can also throw in the chat. So if you're not on the Google Doc for the agenda, you can also access it through the chat. What are some of the questions that you might have that you feel like we need to continue to address in this guidance so that we make sure that we are in there? So you'll see a table. And if you will just pick a cell in that table, it doesn't have to be in any order, and start typing your questions in there. That way we can make sure that we're getting there. And we're not intending on answering those today, because a lot of these we're now down to questions that really we're needing to refer to other departments or to go back to the legislation, work with our legal department so that we can make sure. So if you can drop any other questions that you have in the chat, we would greatly appreciate that. Give me a moment to take care of that. While you're doing that, I also do want to make you aware there is a bill that is being run this year with Representative Stanley that would make a couple of adjustments to our screening. Basically, it would provide exemptions for students who take the OAP, whose primary form of communication is through Braille or sign, and those who are in their first year as an emergent language learner. So there's obviously it's a bill, nothing has passed, but it is one to be aware of that does exist. And if that bill were to pass in either its current form or an amended form, obviously our guidance for that would be adjusted to include that information. So I'll take just a couple more minutes because I do see a few more people still typing on that.
Melissa, we had a question that asked, how long are you going to leave this link up for them to add questions?
Sure, we can easily leave that up through the end of the week, and I probably won't even take it down anytime soon. I just know that as we continue to refer to that, we'll have that. I would say probably at least for the next couple of weeks, we'll have that up for you. That way we can do that. And if for some reason you can't access it and you just want to add to that or say, we've thought of another question, I can't find the link or the link won't work, just send it to us and we'll add that on. That's perfectly fine. Also, one of the things we wanted to make sure is the intention is to get any adjustments that we need to make to guidance, including answers to these questions, completed and printed available to schools no later than July of 2023, so that you will have access to that. Okay, so that we can make sure that we have everything we need. Did I say July? I meant June, before July 1, so that we have that at the beginning of this next fiscal year. So, all right. So I'm going to come on back to our agenda. And if you're still typing in a question, please feel free to do so. That is perfectly fine. We will get there as we keep moving. Science of reading. So as we were talking here, we have noticed that science of reading has been in the news a lot lately. It's a term that we're hearing about here in Oklahoma. And we wanted to provide some clarification about what this term might mean. And so for that purpose, we wanted just to give you a resource. If you have some teachers or administrators or parents who are saying, hey, I'm hearing about the science of reading thing, what does that mean? It can be a little bit difficult to explain. So we just pulled some slides together that you can use. We've made this available to anyone for viewing. We did turn editing off so that we make sure that it's right there. But this would be helpful if you are trying to just give a 5-10 minute conversation about what does this term mean, because there is a lot of confusion right now. So, and again, if you've been into any of our presentations, you've probably seen some or all of these slides, because we really did just pull from things that we have presented in the past. So this is not anything new, but we wanted to make sure that you had it at your fingertips. So we wanted to know, first of all, science of reading is not, because there's a lot of things being thrown around this, that it's just more phonics, or that this is a K-3 initiative. It's not really about testing for kids. It's not a program. We would not do a science of reading approved program, because the science of reading is not an entity that would approve programs, or it's not something we teach with fidelity, because it's really a body of knowledge. Okay, so when we're hearing those kinds of things coming out, whether it's with a reporter, a parent, administrator, gently reminding those people that maybe we have a little bit more learning to do, can be helpful to say, here are some things that we need to make sure that you know that this is not really what we're talking about when we say we're working towards having that good science of reading knowledge in our classroom. So what is it? We know it's multidisciplinary. It's gone across multiple disciplines such as psychology, neuroscience, learning sciences, a lot of different areas. In its research on reading and writing, it's been conducted over the last 5 decades across the world in multiple countries and in multiple languages. So this is not anything new. It's just that it has, in the last, say, 5 or 6 years, really come more to light as more people have picked up on some of these conversations, and that some of that may be due to some reporting, some books or podcasts or stories that have been released. But in a lot of different ways, people have kind of made this awareness. But we want to be pretty clear that this is not a program where a pendulum would swing the other way. It's really making sure that we're paying attention to what research says about how reading and writing works in our brains and how we can best help our students get there. So it's really that theoretical underpinning for instructional methods that science has proven is effective for learning to read. And it's instructional understanding and strategies that capitalize on how the brain processes language so that student growth and achievement can be maximized through prevention of and intervention for reading difficulties. Notice this does not just say dyslexia. There are other reading difficulties, but right now we've been focused a lot on dyslexia because that tends to be, or at least those characteristics tends to be something that is a little more overwhelming in our early grades when we're talking about K-3. But there are other issues that we might be addressing. So again, if you have done anything with me in the past, probably with Sharon, with letters, any of that, you are familiar with that simple view of reading. In other words, that reminder that good reading comprehension, which is our goal, has to involve both word recognition or decoding skills and language comprehension. So this is why this is not just decoding or phonics. This has to be also, do we understand what we're reading? Do we understand how language works together? What's the syntax of a sentence that we're putting together? And as well as how writing fits in with this as well. Again, should be a familiar graphic. If you've spent any time with this, remember we've taken those 2 big buckets of word recognition and language comprehension to really break out what are those different areas in those 2 big buckets that we have to address. So in those early grades, we are working pretty hard and diligently on getting these automatic skills down so that students are ready to take off and use those skills to access more text as it becomes becomes increasingly difficult. And with even with the younger grades, maybe orally, and as they move on, we get more and more attention in our language comprehension as we're building background knowledge, developing vocabulary, understanding inferences, things like that. Again, this is one of the things that we cannot stress enough. This is not that we just do word recognition in K through 2 or even K through 3, and then in 4th grade, we suddenly stop this and we move only to language comprehension. Both areas have to be addressed in all grades. But sometimes the proportion of how that's addressed, or even how the methods of getting to there, might look different from a kindergarten classroom to a 7th grade classroom. So there's a lot of information out there about the science of reading, or how kids learn to read. And some of it is really great information and some of it is not so much. So how do we know what to look at? Well, the best thing that we can do, and one of the things that we at SDE really refer back to, is the National Reading Panel and the work from the Institute of Educational Sciences, or IES, and the practice guides that they've developed as an offshoot of the National Reading Panel. So the National Reading Panel, I'm sure you remember, 22 years ago, was a huge meta-analysis about how do kids learn to read and what makes a student a good reader. And with the IES practice guides, they have now taken some of those smaller components and developed that out a little further, as well as adding in more current research. So there are, I want to say, about 30 practice guides available in all areas of reading, math. They deal with multi-tiered systems of support, writing. 3 of them that we consistently refer to when we're talking about K through 3 reading are listed here with links. Those should be hot links if you pull up those slides so that you have those available. And they have a lot of really good information. It starts off at the beginning, showing a little bit about what the research says. Here are some things that need to be in place to enact that research. And then a lot of them go a lot further in depth of, now here's how this actually can look in the classroom. So if you're not sure really is what you're looking at a good source, or do you think it's accurate or not, if it's matching what's going on here, you are probably in a good position to be looking at that. So you really want it to match this research that we know that this is a good resource here with the IES, the U.S. Department of Ed, American Institutes of Research, that type of area. So when we're looking at a couple of just overall, if you're trying to sum up real quick, what are we talking about when we say science of reading? What do we want kids to be able to do? We want to use teaching principles that are based on evidence for our kids. And this is for all kids, not just kids who are struggling, but this is something that we know all students can benefit from. So the 3 big areas is, we know that we need to have systematic and cumulative information that we're giving to our students. So we need to make sure that they're starting with easier skills and moving on to more difficult skills, and that we build on from that. We know that explicit instruction is necessary, especially for those foundational reading skills, which means we have really planned and purposeful choices of our tasks, our texts, and really of how we're approaching that phonics and spelling instruction. And then finally, that we're using that diagnostic literacy instruction, that we're giving very targeted prompt feedback to our students so that they are correcting mistakes quickly and not continuing to practice something incorrectly. That we're giving them opportunities to apply those skills, teaching that for transfer. So if I'm teaching a phonics pattern, I want to make sure that I'm also making sure that a student knows when to use that when they're spelling a word. And I also want them to be able to practice reading that in a controlled text so that they have a lot of opportunities to practice seeing a pattern and knowing how to say that pattern and apply it to decoding words. And then with that, database decision making, so that we're knowing what do we address for students and when. With those evidence-based practices, notice that the first bullet is really that the speech sounds, connecting it to print. Think about phonemic awareness. And as we quickly connect that to print, so if I am looking at the word bat and I am segmenting the sounds, act, and I want to immediately, as soon as I know those letters, connect that to, hey, this is the sound B, and this is the letter B, and this is how we write the letter B, so that students are putting that together very, very quickly in their schooling. Teaching students to decode and spell words correctly and connecting that to text to support fluency and accuracy. But we also have things in those upper strands of the rope, like making sure that we have high quality text to develop vocabulary, that we are looking at various sentence and text structures so that we grasp an understanding of language, teaching academic language skills, and this goes across all content areas. So this is pulling in our math, our science, social studies, art, music, PE, foreign language, and then developing knowledge through discussions and text. And there's been a lot around making sure that our students have those great opportunities for building knowledge, because that helps with their comprehension, but it also helps them recognize words, because that phonics, that decoding, and that comprehension also have a reciprocal nature, that the more we know, the easier we are able to recognize words when we come across an unknown word and be able to pronounce it correctly. And then as we're reading those words, we're able to read more complex text, which allows us to become more aware of the world, and it increases our comprehension. So that's why both of them work in tandem. And then finally, one of the things that we always make sure of when we're talking about evidence-based literacy instruction or science of reading is that the need for high quality instructional materials is also very important. And it's also a balance to be making sure that we have those comprehensive curriculum materials that are grounded in research, but that our teachers have also been trained for how to use those materials effectively. So hopefully these slides will help you a little bit as you are talking with others around your school or in your community. If they are saying, hey, I heard about this new thing called science of reading, like, first of all, it's not new. And let me tell you a little bit about what it is and what it isn't. Okay, so and hopefully that will be a place that we can provide you a little bit more support. Obviously, we have done multiple trainings about that go a little bit further in depth with that, and we are certainly able to make those available for you if that's something that you would like to have. We knew we did not want to take an hour of our time today going over something that most people on this call probably don't need, but we did want to give you a resource for having those conversations. Okay, let me just pause there. Sharon and Brenda, anything that I need to be aware of going on in the chat? All right. Last month in January, we talked quite a bit as we were moving forward with promotion retention decisions. I just put that same information right here with some chat, but remember that this is a running agenda. So you can also, if you were not able to join us last month, or you just need to go back and refer to some of those items that we discussed, it's just straight down here with our pathway for those decisions to be made. Again, we start with that OSTP, moving to one of our approved screening assessments. Remember, we did emphasize last month that the screening for characteristics of dyslexia does not play into promotion retention decisions under RSA. We're just using that universal screener there. We have our good cause exemptions that students might be able to meet, and then the student reading proficiency team may determine if promotion or retention is best for a student and how we would go about doing that. If you're needing a refresher on those 7 good cause exemptions, again, that is down on January, so you can find that pretty quickly, so that we do have those exemptions listed there. Back up to this month. Try not to make you seasick. All right, so one of the things that we have found is that flow chart seems to really help, especially those of you that are new to RSA, about where do we start, because there are a lot of options there. So we certainly want to start first with that OSTP, and then the screener, and then the good cause exemptions, and then finally the student reading proficiency team would be basically our last thing that we would attempt if we feel that we need to really see if a student is not meeting anything else. Do they need to move forward or not? All right, we cannot get by any of our sessions without giving you some additional resources that you might want to know about from other places other than just the State Department. So I found a couple from the Schenck School that might be useful for you. One is Dr. Tiffany Hogan, and Tiffany Hogan has done a lot of research not around language. She's a speech language pathologist. She's done a lot with language around dyslexia, but she's also looked at students who have what we call developmental language disorder. In other words, those students who can read every single word on the page accurately, just fine, but they are not able to form an understanding of what they've read. So we think about those quadrants, kind of the opposite end of an issue when we're talking about dyslexia. But she did a recent community lecture on the language basis of dyslexia, which might be really helpful for you. I'm just going to quickly go to the site so you know what you're looking at. Should come up pretty quick. Okay, and so you can see the recording of her community lecture, as well as any lecture slides that she had and resources that she noted. So she is pretty easy to talk to or to listen to, and can be really helpful. Something else, again, from ReadSource, which is also associated with the Schenck School, are some reading awareness video series. So if you're looking, especially if you're maybe a new teacher, or you're trying to figure out a way to really help take a little bit deeper dive into an area, they have put together some good video series about reading awareness. Executive function has a lot to do with our students that have that characteristics of dyslexia that might be helpful for you. Same with working memory and multisensory instruction. If you're not familiar with the Schenck School, this is a school that specializes in dealing with dyslexia. So they have a lot of very firm, reliable knowledge around this topic. So this is something that you can count on for getting good, solid information if you're looking for that. Okay, some upcoming professional development to be aware of. The AIM Institute out of Pennsylvania is having their annual symposium. This is something that they make free every year. And they are focusing this year on reading comprehension. And I know as Sharon and I have been talking with teachers and administrators across the state, that really is the area that schools are really trying to turn to right now, it seems. So a lot of our schools have done a lot of outstanding work on making sure that we're addressing phonemic awareness and phonics. And while we may not all be exactly where we want to be yet, they've got themselves on a good path in that direction and are trying to say, okay, now what do we do? And so the next section is, how do we address comprehension? And that is a lot larger beast to go with. So Nancy Hennessy, who is the author of the Reading Comprehension Blueprint, which came out last year, and I know it's something of a bit of a Bible that I've referred to quite a bit when trying to talk about language comprehension skills, is going to be the moderator. And there's, again, Tiffany Hogan that we just talked about will be one of the speakers, along with Dr. Hugh Katz, Amy Elliman, and Dr. Lakeisha Johnson. So this is actually the Monday of most schools' spring break. But they also do make the recording available for free. If this is something that you're not able to attend live and would like to be able to watch that, I tend to try to block off my calendar because this is something that usually has a lot of really good information. So you'll see the website with more information, as well as a registration link if that's something you're interested in. Also, the Oklahoma Literacy Association is having their conference, so something a little bit more home-based, focusing on energizing the reading and writing connection. It will be Saturday, April 1st at Oklahoma Christian University. Dr. Carol Jago will be the keynote presenters, and there will be multiple breakout sessions available. Do be aware there is a fee for this conference. However, your fee also pays for your breakfast and lunch. So sometimes you can also sometimes think of it as you're just prepaying for 2 meals and being able to attend a wonderful presentation for free at that point. So, but again, that registration link is noted here on the agenda too, in case you are needing that. So, okay, so Sharon, Vanda, I've noticed that the chat's been a little bit busy. Anything going on that we need to be aware of?
So there is one question, and I don't know if we know the answer to this, and maybe we do. Are schools able to choose if they want third grade on the computer or paper?
That's a great question. I do not know the answer
I don't
to. So
either.
we will check with our friends in assessment and make sure that we have that question available for you. And I'll probably just go ahead and put it on this agenda since that question's being asked, so that we'll have it, and then we can also send that out too. So, but yeah, I don't want to tell you wrong, and that's not something I have any control over. So.
I'll add
Okay,
the other question in the chat in on the screening document. It's a screening question.
okay. And I do see for Haley, you're saying you have two different screeners that you have. So really the question is, if we use one screener, but a student meets that grade level benchmark for the end of third grade on a different screener, does that mean that they can move forward? Yes. They just have to be on one of the approved screening assessments. Now, I do always, as soon as that question gets asked, I do tend to caution districts about trying to pay for and give multiple screening assessments, because screening assessments don't give you a ton of information. So if that is something you might be that though your district is piloting a new screening, and so they're just trying something out before you give up what you've been used to, and that's perfectly fine. That makes a lot of sense. But I would recommend making sure that you are using your resources, both time and money, maybe on more diagnostic assessments, which would give you more information rather than on multiple screeners. But the answer to the original question, does it have to be on just the one screener that we have listed as our official screener? No, as long as it's one of the approved screening assessments that the state board has approved, as long as they have met that, then they are able to be promoted on. As far as do they need to be on an IPRI or not, are they considered at risk? That really comes down to a decision that needs to be made by the district. If you have two pieces of conflicting data, one that screening assessment shows they are at risk for reading difficulty, one shows they are not, I would really recommend that as a school team, you're looking at and saying, does this child really need that intervention? Or maybe do we need to check in on them again in a month and maybe give them a quick monitor to see how they're doing? Are they still able to maintain? Because while there's that difference between compliance of what is it that we have to do and what is it that's best to meet the needs of that student. Okay. So if that student is there, everything else is fine. Maybe they had a bad testing day on that one test, but everything else is showing that they're doing great, then no, you don't need to do anything else with that. But if you have some conflicting data and they're right there on that edge, you might want to consider checking in with them sooner than the next benchmark window, or maybe they do need a little bit of intervention just to kind of push them on forward so that they don't have a larger problem later on. So,
Melissa, I asked Cheyenne that question.
So
The question about the third grade OSTP, I just messaged our director of ELA assessments from the assessment office, and she said that no, all third graders take the computer-based assessment unless they have an IEP that specifies paper or pencil testing as their accommodation.
Perfect. Thank you for doing that, Sharon. And we will make sure that we are. I'm not able to add that on right now. I had to switch computers very quickly, so I'll get that added onto this document so that we have it. Yes, the book that we were talking about was the Reading Comprehension Blueprint. I pull it out, except that I have it at home where I'm reading it. Sharon, do you have yours available? Yes, you do, except you have your background on, so it's hard to see. Let me just do this. I know also that she's been doing a lot of webinars over the last year. And I know a lot of people have picked up on some of those free webinars to listen to her talk about how some of those things could come in handy too. So that could be something else of just doing a search on some of the different webinars that she might have done on the Reading Comprehension Blueprint. So, all right. What else might be happening in your world that we need to address? Otherwise, we're happy to give you 20 minutes of your day back. All righty. Well, thank you so much for giving up of your time. I hope that these resources will help you. We appreciate the questions that you were able to give us. We will certainly take and look at these so that we can look at there. Oh, yes. And I did want to, that bill that I mentioned earlier about the exemptions is also addressing some of the issues that we're seeing with the legislation, the dyslexia screener, namely is the advanced phonemic awareness, which is what's requiring us to use the past. If that terminology is removed, then we can remove the past from that. But again, as of right now, we are doing what we're supposed to be doing. If that bill passes, if the law changes, then we will let you know of how that guidance will change. And I realize the past would be a big issue with that. And that would probably be something that would allow a lot of us to breathe a sigh of relief. But for right now, the way the law is written, it is something that we are having to do. So, all right. Okay, well, hopefully don't forget you can use those slides however you might need to. If you need some additional information, please let us know. And we will make sure that we get there. All right, have a great day. Let's see, I know a few of you are logging off. Let me get a couple of chat. Cohort 1 will have access to the online letters resources until August of 2023. So they will be able to finish any of the online resources over the summer if they need to. iStation for RSA, and Mira for screening of dyslexia. Okay. So, and Crystal, I see that you've got the two different that you used, one for RSA, one for dyslexia. That might be something that you want to talk with your leadership in your district about. Is there a way to possibly use one of those for both areas? Because both of them have been approved for both areas, and that way it can reduce your cost and can reduce your testing time. So just you might look at the information you were able to gather this year and what you feel would be easiest for you to address as you're moving forward. So can we use, yes, so Crystal, yes, you can use a Mira also to meet that RSA requirement, since it is also an RSA measure, even though your iStation is really your RSA, official RSA measure. So yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah, and Sharon, thank you for adding that link again for the questions for Dana. I think that's Lupe. We'll make sure that we are, if you're talking about the questions that we were putting down for the dyslexia screening, that will be a guidance document that will be released in June. And we will make sure that that is well advertised so that you have that, that we will be able to get. I do not anticipate we will have those questions ready to be published by the next RSA meeting, because whenever we release a guidance document, it goes through a lot of different departments to ensure accuracy. Our legal department generally looks at it, as well as our communications and our leadership. So it does take a little bit of time to get through that process, but we wanted to make sure that we were addressing the right questions as we look at that guidance. And the questions on the ongoing agenda, the one about the OSTP, I will type that in once we hang up. And usually since we have this recording posted, we just leave the questions there that we answer verbally on that recording. So, all right, thank you all. We appreciate you. You've got 15 minutes back to your day. I hope you can take a moment and breathe, and we will see you next month. Thank you.